So, a very good afternoon to all of you present here. I, Dr. Krishna Sinhamahapatra, welcome you to the sixth lecture of the lecture series on literary theory post World War II. As all of you have been there for the last sessions, you have already been seeing that we have discussed various aspects of this particular topic. We discussed about the very basic idea of what is literature, how literary theory is related to that, how or what we mean by literary criticism, and then we discussed different theories like new criticism, formalism, and then we went on to other theories like reader response criticism, which comes just opposite to the idea of formalism and new criticism. And then we have discussed structuralism, post-structuralism, postmodernism, and we have discussed psychoanalytic criticism. And yesterday we discussed feminism in details. It was an exclusive lecture on feminism, which is lecture number 5 on literary theory post-World War II, wherein we have discussed the topic in details. And today we are going to cover the rest of the topics which are there for literary theory post-World War II. This is going to be our last session on the topic literary theory post-World War II. On the screen, you can see my details. As I tell in every lecture, that you can connect with me through the details which are available. You can see my channel's name, wherein you can connect with me after the lecture. During the lecture, we have got the live chat option. So if you have anything to share with me, please go ahead, write it down. I will be replying back to you through my channel, that is Krishna's Canvas, for your details and whatever things you want to share with me, right? So now, as we are discussing, today is lecture 6 and it's the last lecture of literary theory post-World War II, wherein we will cover the theories which are still not covered and which are important for your net set examination, net set English. So just the way we have tried to cover the important points of every topic, today also we will try to do the same. As discussed yesterday, wherein I had told you that today we will start with archetypal criticism. So here we are to discuss archetypal criticism. Now the term archetype, from which the archetypal criticism comes, we are going to try and understand that. So the term comes from both an adjective and a prefix, and it is a kind of mixture of what? A type, a noun. So arch is a kind of adjective which literally means chief or principal. That is important. The thing which is chief, which is important, which is principal, right? As a prefix, it refers to what? To the highest or the most important. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to decode this term which we are trying to read right now, we are trying to understand right now, which is archetypal criticism, and we are trying to analyze the term archetype, wherein it means literally the chief or principal, and as a prefix it refers to the highest or of the most important value. Now, by narrow definition, an archetype is an original model or type. So, original model or type after which similar things are patterned, that is a prototype. So it is basically referring to what? It is referring to an ideal example. So an appropriate and ideal example of something is referred to as archetype. As used in literature, an archetype is what? It is a recurrent. So this is important from the aspect of literary theory, from the aspect of what archetypal criticism does. So an archetype is a recurrent universal pattern that evokes a deep emotional response in virtually all readers as it strikes a chord in their unconscious memory. So there are a few words which we'll have to take care of when we are reading this to understand the concept even in a better way. Sorry, excuse me. So the first word is recurrent, means it keeps on coming, it gets on repeated. Next is universal. So it's something which is an universal pattern, not just in one text, but it's something which is universally accepted, an universal pattern that evokes, that is, that gives rise to, that results in what? A deep emotional response. So what kind of response? A deep emotional response in virtually all readers, as it strikes a chord in their unconscious memory. So, it evokes a deep emotional response in virtually all readers as it strikes a chord in their unconscious memory. Now, if you remember the concept of mind and the layers of mind, we have already discussed when we were talking or dealing with psychoanalytic criticism. Now, archetypal critics look for such patterns in literature, relying on archaeology, anthropology, psychology, history, and religion to identify and explain the total human experience. So, what do the archetypal critics do? They look for such patterns in literature, and when they are looking for those patterns in literature, where do they look or where do they find these patterns? Then for that, they are relying on what? On archaeology, they are relying on anthropology, they are relying on psychology, on history and religion to do what? To identify and explain the total human experience. So, the total human experience is explained through what? Through the use of different kinds of archetypes, and this is what archetypal criticism tries to find out. Now, what can be the archetypes like? So, how would you define what kind of archetypes do you see around you? That is what we are going to see. So, archetypes can be what? They can be symbols, they can be images, they can be characters, they can be plot structures. So once again, what kind of archetypes types can be there in our, when we are doing a literary study? What kind of archetypes can be there? So there can be symbols, there can be images, there can be specific characters and plot structures, and they will pertain to the qualities which we have already discussed in the previous slide. What are the qualities we discussed? We discussed that they are going to be recurrent, that is, they are going to be repetitive, and they are going to do what? They are going to be appealing to some universal concept or universal idea. Now, how are these archetypes revealed? So, the archetypes are revealed in or through what? Through myths, religions, and folklore, dreams and fantasies, literature, drama, film. Right? So, what are the kinds of archetypes? The archetypes are in the form of symbols, they are in the form of images, they are in the form of characters and plot structures. Right? So, this is how the archetypes are. And they are revealed through what? They are revealed through myths, religions and folklore, dreams and fantasies, literature, drama, film. Right? So this is or these are the areas through which archetypes can be kind of explained and they can be seen. Now we are reading the first theorist of archetypal criticism, who is Carl Jung. So the term and idea come primarily from Swiss. So he is a Swiss psychologist, Carl Jung, who also studied myth and religion. So he studied myth and religion and he came up with the idea of archetypal criticism. According to Jung, all humans share what he called as collective unconscious. So, dear students, this term is very important. Keep a note of this. The idea of collective unconscious. So, this unconscious is a collection of memories and images comprising a racial past of pre-human experiences, the memories from which have been erased. So certain parts of it might be erased, certain parts of it might be there in your mind, but it is the point which you have to keep in mind is that it is a collection of memories and images comprising a racial past of human experience. So this much you will have to remember regarding the idea of collective unconscious, wherein this concept is important and you need to keep a note of that and know who propounded it, and that is the theorist who has given us this concept and what does that concept talk about. So it is talking about the collection of memories and images which is there as a part of a racial past of our pre-human experiences, and this whole thing comes across as collective unconscious. Archetypal images then stimulate or trigger these memories in all of us. That is why they are so powerful and universal. Images do, the archetypal images actually direct us towards the things which are already there in our mind. That is the things which are already a part of the collective unconscious in our mind. The archetypal images are actually kind of directing us towards them, which is stimulating or triggering these memories in all of us, and that makes them so powerful. And hello, I can see one of the one's live yogs meditation and relaxation saying, so good afternoon, please be there. So archetypal images, they stimulate or trigger these memories in all of us. That is why they are so powerful and universal. Now the origin, let us discuss the origin. So a permanent deposit in the mind of an experience that has been constantly repeated for many generations. So what does it talk about? Archetypal criticism talks about a permanent deposit. That is something which is stored in our mind, right? Deposit means things which we are storing. We are depositing money. So you are accumulating something. So a permanent deposit, an accumulation of something. What? Of an experience that has been constantly repeated for generations. So the experiences which have been repeated for generations. Next, archetypes interpenetrate and interfuse with one another. So they are not just individually distinct beings, but different archetypes. They interpenetrate and interfuse with one another. They are experienced via what? Via myths, dreams, visions, rituals, neurotic and psychotic symptoms, and works of art, which contain a great deal of archetypal material. So, referring to the images which are there with us for generations. So, there are presumed to be numerous archetypes in collective unconscious. We just discussed the concept of collective unconscious, and hence it is presumed, that is, it is expected, it is thought that there are different kinds of archetypes already existing in the collective unconscious of a human mind. Now, some of the ones that have been identified are like birth, rebirth, death, power, magic, unity, the hero, the child, God, the demon, the old wise man, the earth mother, and the animals. So these are certain of them which is expected that it is a part of the collective unconscious, and hence it is already existing. What are the major tenets? So archetypal criticism is concerned with the way cycles and reiterating patterns of tradition, culture, inborn images, and beliefs affect literary works. So how does images affect the literary works which we are reading? It operates with the idea that certain symbols represent the same idea no matter the time or the place. So it expects or it thinks that certain symbols represent the same ideas no matter in whichever time it is kind of put. Then authors focus on symbols to utilize in literary works in order to strike readers unconscious. So these symbols are the archetypes. They are looking for certain strict archetypes which they can use in order to do what? In order to strike the readers unconscious, in order to affect the unconscious and the collective unconscious, so that the reader is moved by that particular piece of literature. So such symbols recur often enough in literature to be recognizable as an element of one's literary experience as a whole. Such symbols means the archetypes we are talking about. So the archetypes recur, that is, they keep on getting repeated in literature to be recognizable, so that we can identify them as an element of one's literary experience as a whole. It also deals with symbolism of nature and the cosmos. Cosmos is referring to the world around us. So it deals with what? It deals with symbolism. There is universality in literature, anthropology, and psychology, and that is what archetypal criticism makes its target. Anthropological and psychological studies of the late 19th and early 20th centuries sparked the beginning of this criticism. This criticism is referring to what? Archetypal criticism. Information provided from the findings of past cultures influenced many prominent writers. So many prominent writers were influenced by what? By the information which was provided from the findings of the past cultures. Also, myths from the Greek and Roman eras were thought of as a profound, and as a result, the desire to incorporate such ideas in writing was instigated. So, the myths which are there or employed in the Greek and Roman eras, they were thought as profound. That is of very much of importance, and as a result there was a need and desire, so there was a kind of interest in incorporating or in utilizing them or making them a part of, incorporating such ideas in writing, so that whoever reads that piece of writing, they will come to know about the Greek and Roman myths which have been made a part of that part of literature or that piece of literature. So archetypal criticism came into prominence in the 1930s and 40s and continued to flourish in the 1950s and 1960s. Now we will be discussing the theory's strengths and advantages. So what are the advantages of this particular theory? So archetypal criticism focuses on certain symbols and their meanings. Almost all literature is written to convey events that mean something. Archetypal criticism looks for these meanings as well as what the symbols in the stories stand for. So, they are doing what? Archetypal criticism is focusing on certain symbols and their meanings. Almost all literature is almost all literature is written to convey events that mean something, as well as the idea of something being the symbol in the story, what kind of symbol it is, that is also explained through it. It acts as a powerful tool in teaching and in expressing universal feelings, beliefs, and ideas. So if you remember, the idea that, when we are talking about archetypal criticism, it is referring to, or it is appealing to, the universal aspect is always there. Then it is very closely linked to the psychological theories and criticism. So it is very closely linked to what? Very closely linked with psychological theories and criticism. Why so? Because if you remember, we were talking about the idea of the collective unconscious, which is referring to the things and images which are there in our mind. So archetypal criticism is trying to make an appeal to these aspects which are there in our mind through the use of certain symbols which are universal and recurrent in the field of literature. Then it also explains why literature touches deep inside the heart of the reader. So you will see that sometimes in a class you are reading a piece of text. You have been given a piece of text, you are reading it, and you give your examination, you are done with your examination, you completely forget about that text. However, you will see certain pieces of literature which you have perhaps read because it was there for your examination and you have appeared for the examination. But even after that, those pieces of literature are still appealing to you and you are still kind of remembering them. They are still there in your thought. You don't forget them. And it is mainly because those pieces of literature actually hit you hard. They kind of touch your heart. They touch your heart by appealing to the images, the symbols, and ideas which are there as a part of collective unconsciousness in our mind, which makes those pieces of literature something distinct, something different from a kind of a normal text or any other ordinary text, right? So this is what it is talking about. So with this we kind of come to the end of our discussion on archetypal criticism, wherein we try to understand what do we mean by archetypes, how does this, the origin of this particular word, how archetypal criticism is used in the field of literature in order to kind of create a very deep impact in the reader's mind. How, when we are reading archetypal criticism today, we can now actually analyze any piece of literature and see that how certain symbols, images, certain plots, certain kinds of characters are always repeated. They are recurrent and they are universally found in any piece of literature from any part of the country we pick up. Right. So this is what archetypal criticism talks about. It is related to psychoanalytic criticism because it is talking about and actually taking into its incorporation the mind, how the mind works, and how it is important to deal with a piece of literature, keeping in mind how it appeals the mind of the reader. Right. So with this, we kind of we are wrapping up our discussion on archetypal criticism, and now we are moving towards the next literary theory, the theory of Marxism. Marxism, just like feminism, is again based on the kind of ideologies which are there in and around us, and it talks about the relationship between the haves and the have-nots. And again, as I said, that it is not just restricted to reading a book and analyzing a piece of literature, but it's something more to it. It's about our way of living and our way of approaching things around us and kind of identifying our identities based on the various influences which are there around us. So Marxism generally refers to the ideas of the German philosopher Karl Marx. So you can see that Marxism actually originates or gets its name from his name, Karl Marx. But Marxism does not mean exclusively the ideas of Marx. So Marxism does not mean exclusively, that is, just or specifically the ideas of Marx. So it is not only about the ideas of Marx, but there is something more to Marxism. It is something which is always evolving, and it is something which is a kind of a part of our existence. We cannot completely deny that. So it includes the ideas of Marx, Friedrich Engels, and their supporters who call themselves Marxists. So who are the Marxists? The supporters. So it includes not only the ideas of Marx, but also the ideas of Friedrich Engels, their supporters who call themselves Marxists. Thus, Marxism refers to the body of ideas which predominantly contains the ideas of Karl Marx. So, predominantly in the sense, the most important part or the contribution is of Marx. However, the later theorists have added to it. Right. Now, Marxism is a living philosophy. What I was trying to tell you, that it is not something which is just resting in the books, but it's a living philosophy. It is something which is growing, which is evolving. So, Marxist thinkers are continuously contributing to the philosophy of Marxism, which makes it lively, which makes it very, very approachable and practical in today's world. So, Marxist thinkers are continuously contributing to the philosophy of Marxism. Thus, it is said that Marx is dead, but Marxism is still alive. So, though Marx is dead, but Marxism is still alive, it is still evolving, it is still growing. Now, we will try and understand the difference between utopian socialist or utopian socialism and the scientific socialist or scientific socialism. So, as said earlier, Marxism existed before Marx. These are known as the early socialist thinkers. So, the early socialist thinkers were also talking about the same things which Marx had been talking. But they were speaking without any scientific interrogation. As a result, Karl Marx calls them as utopian socialists. So, what kind of socialists? Utopian socialists. What does utopia bring to our mind? Utopia brings to our mind a place which is not perhaps logically, possible to reach a thing of imagination, right? So Marx is terming the early socialist thinkers as the utopian socialists, and he calls his socialism, so the socialism which he started, as the scientific socialism. So what is scientific socialism? Scientific socialism is the approach towards socialism which Karl Marx started. So it is scientific because it offers the economic interpretation of history by using the scientific methodology of dialectical materialism. So he uses the scientific methodology which is termed as what? As dialectical materialism. So evolutionary socialism does not believe in revolution and wants to attain a socialism through peaceful means. And what does revolutionary socialism do? On the other hand, believes in the class struggle, revolution, and the dictatorship of the proletariat. So this is the difference between the evolutionary and the revolutionary socialism. And as we discussed, Marx calls his socialism as scientific socialism because it is scientific based on the economic interpretation which it brings into the analysis of history by using the scientific method of dialectical materialism. Now we are going to discuss what do we mean by dialectical materialism. So dialectical materialism is the scientific methodology developed by Marx and Engels for the interpretation of history. Here, Marx has borrowed heavily from his predecessor, particularly the German philosopher Hegel. So he has borrowed from the German philosopher Hegel. Now, dialectics is a very old methodology employed to discover truth by exposing contradictions through a clash of opposite ideas. So what does dialectics do? It is a very old methodology employed to discover what? To discover truth by doing what? How are they discovering truth? They are discovering truth by exposing what are they exposing? They're exposing the contradictions through a clash of opposite ideas. So through the clash of opposite ideas, they are trying to expose the main truth. So Hegel refined it by developing the trilogy of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Because Marxism has taken from Hegel, we are studying his concept of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So this is popularly known as the dialectical triad. So progress or growth. So progress is representing growth, something which is growing. It takes place through the dialectical process. And dialectical process is the process of where the contradictions bring about the real face of the truth. At every stage of growth, it is characterized by contradictions. These contradictions induce further changes and progress and development. So, at every stage of growth, it is characterized by contradictions, and these contradictions induce, that is, bring about what? Bring about further changes, progress, and development. Now let us try and understand what is thesis, what is antithesis, and what is synthesis. So the thesis is challenged by its antithesis. So this idea of contradiction, as you can understand, is brought about by the exchange between the thesis and the antithesis. So thesis is one course of thought, antithesis perhaps is just the opposite course of thought, and they come together and they come against each other, and it kind of leads to the synthesis, the point of synthesis. So both contain elements of truth and falsehood. Because any fact, it's not really possible that will be absolutely true. If we really understand what truth is, then any fact has some elements of truth in it and some elements of falsehood in it. Both these elements are there in both the facts. Facts in the sense both in thesis and in antithesis. So truth is permanent, but falsehood is transitory. That is, if something is true, you will see that it is going to stay till the end. If something is false, then it will be moving out of the scene very easily. It is transitory. So in the ensuing conflict of the thesis and the antithesis, the truth remains. So in the conflict of the thesis and antithesis, what happens? The truth remains, but the false elements, what happens to them? The false elements, they get destroyed. These false elements constitute what? They constitute the contradictions. So what does the contradictions kind of are born of, or what does the contradictions consist of? So they consist of the false elements which slowly are destroyed. So the true elements of both the thesis and the antithesis are fused together in order to create what? In order to create the idea of synthesis. So Marxism takes its ideas from, or borrows its ideas from its predecessor, that the thinker who came earlier, and that is German philosopher Hegel. And the idea of dialectics, which is again a very old methodology which has been employed to discover truth, wherein truth is received or is born out of contradictions, that is clash of opposite ideas. And he actually gives a model to it, that is Hegel actually gives us a model to this, or he actually gives us certain typical terms to it, that is the term of thesis, the term of antithesis, and the term of synthesis. And these three terms together is termed as the dialectical triad, right? So progress or growth takes place through the dialectical process. At every stage of growth, it is characterized by contradictions. And then he explains how the contradictions happen. So the thesis is challenged by what? By the antithesis. Both contain elements of truth and falsehood. And with time, what happens? Truth remains as it is because truth is permanent. But the falsehood, thing which is false, that evaporates or that becomes obsolete, that is transitory. As a result, finally, the false elements, which are the contradictions, they cease to exist, that is, they stop existing, and the true elements of both the thesis and the antithesis are fused together to create what is known as the synthesis. Similar to dialectical criticism, there came up this term now, historical materialism. So, historical materialism is the application of dialectical materialism to interpretation of history. So, try and understand what we are saying here. So, historical materialism is the application of dialectical materialism to the interpretation of history. It is the economic interpretation of world history by applying Marxian methodology of dialectical materialism. So, what is it? It is an economic interpretation of what? Of world history. And how is it done? It is done by applying what? By applying the Marxian methodology. Which methodology? The methodology of dialectical materialism, which we just discussed in the previous slide. So, world history has been divided into 4 stages, that is primitive communism, the slavery system, feudalism, and capitalism. This is how the growth of history is charted, and this is how it has been analyzed based on the methodology of dialectical materialism, which is a Marxian methodology. So, historical materialism is an economic interpretation of the world history by applying the Marxian methodology of dialectical materialism. So, first, the slave system is succeeded by feudalism. Technological development leads to changes in the means of production, and this brings about corresponding changes in the relations of production and the superstructure. The slave system is replaced by feudal mode of production and is kind of reflected in the society, polity, morality, and the value system. The feudal lords own the means of production, that is land, but the peasants carry out the production work. Capitalism succeeds feudalism. Now, division of society into bourgeois and proletariat class categorizes capitalism. So, in capitalism, the haves and have-nots have been classified as the bourgeois and the proletariat class. The bourgeois class owns the means of production, but the proletariat class carries out the production. So, bourgeois class is doing what? The bourgeois class owns the means of production, and the proletariat class carries out the production. So, that is how historical materialism kind of identified the way history developed. Now, we have come to the theory of surplus value. So, Marx has developed the theory of surplus value to explain the exploitation in the capitalist society. So, what is it talking about? It is talking about the exploitation. Exploitation where? Exploitation in the capitalist society. Here, Marx was influenced by the theories of classical economists. He subscribed to the labor theory of value. The value of a commodity is determined by the amount of labor consumed in its production. So, labor is also a commodity. So, usually we don't consider labor as a commodity, but we have to understand that labor is also a commodity. It can be bought and sold like other commodities, because we are kind of, buying a person by paying him. So, he is also a kind of commodity. So, out of the 4 factors of production, labor is the most vital. So, out of the 4 factors of production, which is the most important form? It is labor. Now, land, capital, and organization are the other factors of production. So, the 4 factors: land, capital, organization, and labor, out of which labor is the most vital, according to Marx. It is the application of labor to these factors of production which makes them productive. In the absence of labor, the other forms or the other kind of aspects of production, they are sterile, that is, they are not productive anymore. So, the thing which makes everything productive is the labor, and the absence of labor makes any form of production sterile, or it doesn't allow them the capacity to create or to add value. Now comes the concept of class struggle. So, according to Marx, the history of all hitherto existing society has been the history of what? The history of class struggle. So, what kind of history? History of. So, the history of all hitherto existing society has been the history of class struggle. Right? So, except the primitive communist stage, all historical ages have been characterized by the antagonism between the dominant and the dependent classes, or the haves and the have-nots. So, the concept of have and have-not has been there for ages, and the clash between the haves and the have-nots has also been an important part in which history has progressed. Now we come to the theory of alienation. So there occurs an epistemological break in Marx's philosophy with the writing of Communist Manifesto in 1848. And we get the idea of the theory of alienation from here. So Communist Manifesto in 1848. Right? So, the theory of alienation is an important Marxian concept. The Hungarian Marxist George Lukács had developed the theory of alienation entirely on his own, or even before the publication of manuscripts in 1932. However, the concept of alienation became popular only after the publication of the manuscripts. And Marx has identified 4 levels of alienation. So, firstly, man is alienated from his own product and from his work progress. So, where is or how is a man alienated? Man is, first let us try and understand what is alienation, right? When we are saying alienation, what are we meaning that? If anybody is aware of it, please, you can write it in the chat box. Any idea on what is alienation? Any idea? Anybody? What is alienation? So alienation, this concept was very, we could understand this concept through COVID. So during the first, second and third wave of COVID, when we were asked to isolate ourselves from around us, from the people around us, that is where we actually could understand what do we mean by alienation. So alienation basically means what? It means isolation, right? So Marx has identified 4 levels of alienation or 4 levels of isolation which a man faces. So firstly, man is alienated from his own product and from his work process because the worker plays no part in deciding what to produce and how to produce it. So as industry came in, industrialization happened. What happened? A man was slowly getting alienated or distanced from his own product, from his work process, because the worker played no part in deciding what to produce and how to produce, because they were just a part of the whole process of production. Secondly, what happened? Due to industrialization, man is alienated from nature. His work does not give him a sense of satisfaction as a creative worker. Under mechanization, work tends to become increasingly routinized and monotonous. So the work which you are doing, that becomes very, very kind of a routine life. It becomes monotonous, means it becomes boring. So under mechanization, so he is actually talking about the way in which mechanical work which we are doing in the world of machines, that we are also becoming like machines, doing routine work in a monotonous and in a very kind of not interesting way. Thirdly, what happens? Thirdly, man is getting alienated from other men. So, man is getting alienated from humanity. Man is getting alienated from the other men around us, right? So, the first one is talking about alienation from the product of labor. That is, the product is no more related to me. I'm not really deciding what is happening to the product in an industrial age. Secondly, what is happening? The man is getting alienated from nature because the life is becoming monotonous, and the process of labor, the process of work which they are doing is so uninteresting that they are getting alienated from the process of labor. And then comes the alienation from humanity, that is from men. So we are discussing 4 levels. So if these 3 are the first 3 levels, what according to you will be the 4th level? Anybody would like to answer? What would be the 4th level of alienation as per Karl Marx, if the first 3 we have just discussed, right? So if a human being is getting distanced from the process of work, is distant from the product and also men, then the final thing which is left with us is what we term as the society. So if we are living in a house, we are living in a place, we are living in a society, that society will have many people around us, but as we are getting distanced from what we are getting distanced from men, as a result we will also get distance from society at large. So that is the 4th aspect of alienation according to Marx. Now we are discussing Engels. So Engels developed what is known as Marxism together with Karl Marx. So he plays a very important role in giving shape to the idea of Marxism. So in 1845, he published The Condition of the Working Class in England based on personal observations and research in English cities. So he had conducted certain research based on kind of things which he had observed, and he had done those in the English cities. So in 1845, Engels co-authored the Communist Manifesto with Marx, and also authored and co-authored primarily with Marx many other works which contribute to the whole body of Marxism. So their works actually contribute to the entire body of Marxism or Marxist theory, because Engels and Marx, they worked together and they wrote things together. Now, later, Engels supported Marx financially, allowing him to do research and write Das Kapital. And after Marx's death, Engels edited the 2nd and 3rd volumes of Das Kapital. And this book also is very, very important for your Marxist theory. Additionally, Engels organized Marx's notes on the theories of surplus value, which were later published as the 4th volume of Das Kapital. So, the theory of surplus value, which we just discussed, so that was also kind of organized, in the like Engels organized the Marx's notes on the theories of surplus value, which he later on published as the 4th volume of Das Kapital after Marx's death. So we see that Engels played a very important role in kind of construct the entire course of Marxian philosophy or the Marxist philosophy over the years. Then comes the concept of Louis Althusser. So Althusser kind of his view, Althusser's view or values, in Althusser's view, what happens is that the basic values, desires and preferences which a human being has, he believes are inculcated in us by ideological practice. The sphere which has the defining property of constituting individuals as subjects. So he brings in the idea of what? The idea of ideology. So herein, understanding the concept of ideology is very important. So any idea what do we mean by ideology? Yes, anybody? What do we mean by ideology? So ideology is basically a system of ideas and ideals, especially which forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy. So it is referring to certain ideas and ideals, right? And this leads us to the concept of ideological state apparatus. So ideological practice consists of an assortment of institutions called ideological state apparatuses. And what does ideological state apparatus include? So ideological state apparatus includes all these things which you can see before you in the screen. So what do they include? They include the family, the media, religious organizations, and most importantly, in capitalist societies, the education system, as well as the received ideas that they propagate. But mainly, it includes these things which we are seeing before our screen, that is family, the media, and religious organizations, most importantly, the education system. Why education system is important? Because we are saying that ideology is talking about the ideals, it is talking about the beliefs which are kind of circulated in and around us, and education system is the system which is there in our society, which is rather existing in our society, with the idea of what? Spreading knowledge, with the concept of spreading ideas. That is why ideological state apparatuses kind of consist of family, because when a child is born, the child is not going to a school directly. The child gets his or her basic education at home. Either he or she learns things from around her or him by seeing things, by observing things, or it so happens that you have different members in the family who are teaching you and who are preaching different things to you. Then comes the concept. So the family plays an important role while a child is growing up, in order to share ideas and in order to give a base to the way a child is going to think. His way of thought, his way of vision is kind of given a base by the family. Then comes the idea of media. So today we'll see that we have got so many news channels and we have got so many reporters, so many people from the media. In the newspapers, we see different pieces of news, right? But it is very difficult to really understand which piece of news is actual truth. We really don't know that. What is the job of the media? The media is creating stories. And as it is creating stories, what is it doing? It is creating different versions of reality. It is creating different versions of ideas and philosophies through their stories. And it becomes very difficult to actually understand who is, kind of behind that story, who is trying to mold people's mind, what is their agenda, why are they saying. But we, without knowing that, we keep on getting influenced by the media. Then comes the idea of the religious organizations. So being a part of the society, you are also having a particular religion. And in India, we have got, just like regional diversity, we have got religious diversity also. People are following different religions, and each religion preaches its own path, its own ways, its own, thoughts and processes, right? So this is what kind of the idea of religious organization comes in. As a child is growing, he or she is not only influenced by the family, by the media, but also by the religious organizations, their programs, their channels. And when you are going to a particular religious place, you're meeting a religious person and having a discussion, you are getting influenced by that particular discussion. And above all, definitely is the education system, because in any society, in any capitalist society, education system has been created in order to kind of influence people. Now you will see that in education system, the books which we are reading, the texts which we are reading, the subjects which we are reading, that is also kind of controlled by people in power. As a result, you will see that the last day I was seeing in the newspaper that certain texts on Baba Sahib Ambedkar are being removed from the DU syllabus. Again, we were seeing that there is reference that certain text related to caste will be, or it's being thought that they are also going to be deleted. Now, who is taking these decisions? And why are they taking these decisions? Definitely, there will be some conscious understanding to why these things are done. You will see that recently this entire school books and their system has been changed, with new chapters, incorporation of new chapters and removal of other chapters. So what happens in the process of growing up, what a child is going to read, what a child is not going to read, that is actually designed and taken care of by the people in power, who are in the process of creating the syllabus and dispersing the knowledge base. So no single ISA is referring to ideological state apparatus, produces in us the belief that we are self-conscious agents. Instead, we derive this belief in the course of learning what is to be a daughter, a school child, a black, a steel worker, a counselor, and so forth. So just one ISA, that is ideological state apparatus, doesn't produce in us the belief that we are self-conscious agents. But what happens is that slowly, in the course of learning, an individual kind of understands what is it to be a daughter, a school child, black, steel worker, a counselor, a doctor, a female person working in a corporate world. So these things are actually kind of created over a period of time. Now, despite its many institutional forms, the function and structure of ideology is unchanging and present throughout history. As Althusser says, that ideology has no history. So the function and structure of ideology is unchanging, and it's present. Where is it present? It's present throughout history. As Althusser states, ideology has no history. All ideologies constitute what? It constitutes a subject, even though he or she may differ according to each particular ideology. Althusser illustrates this with the concept of hailing or interpellation. So this term, hailing and interpellation, is also very important. You might, kind of get a question regarding who proposed this idea and what does it talk about. So Althusser is saying that illustrates the concept of hailing or interpellation, wherein he compares ideology to a policeman who is shouting, "Hey, you there," toward a person walking on the street. So a person who is walking on the street, a policeman is shouting, "Hey, you there." And Althusser is saying that ideology is something basically similar to this. So upon hearing this call, the person responds by turning around, and in doing so is transformed into a subject. So how do you become a subject? You become a subject when you are responding to somebody who is calling you here, and is saying that, "Hey, you there," and you are responding to that subject. You are that person, and when you are responding, you are getting transformed into a subject. right? So interpellation gives us the theory of how an individual becomes a subject. The person being held recognizes themselves as the subject of the held and knows to respond. Althusser calls this recognition a misrecognition mechanisms because it works retroactively. That is, a material individual is always already an ideological subject even before he or she is born. The transformation of an individual into a subject has always happened. Althusser here acknowledges a debt to Spinoza's theory of immanence. So he takes again kind of some cue from Spinoza's theory of immanence. Althusser has had broad influence in the areas of Marxist philosophy and post-structuralism. Interpellation has been popularized and adapted by the feminist philosopher and critic Judith Butler, whom we had discussed yesterday, and elaborated further by Goran Thurbon. The concept of ideological state apparatuses has been of interest to Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Zizek. The attempt to view history as a process without a subject garnered sympathy from Jacques Derrida. Historical materialism was defended as a coherent doctrine from the standpoint of analytical philosophy by G. A. Cohen. Now we will be understanding the concept of base and superstructure. So, base and superstructure are these two are linked theoretical concepts which have been developed by Karl Marx, who is one of the founders of sociology. So base refers to the production of what? Production of forces or the materials and resources that generate the goods society needs. So base is referring to what? Is referring to the production forces or the materials and resources that generate, that is, that lead to the goods which society needs. Superstructure describes what? Superstructure describes all other aspects of the society. What does it include? So society's superstructure includes the culture in which a human being is there, the ideology, that is the belief systems and the kind of ideas which are followed, norms, that is the rules and the structures which are followed, and identities. So the kind of identities which are there, the identities that people inhabit, that people have. So in addition, it refers to the social institutions. And social institutions, we were just discussing how there are different social institutions. Then there are the political structures and the state or society's governing apparatus. So Marx argued that the superstructure grows out of the base and reflects the ruling class's interests. So he is saying that the superstructure, wherein the superstructure is actually including what? Is including culture, it is including ideology, it is including norms, it is including identities that people inhabit, which people have. So he's saying that the superstructure actually, what happens? It grows, or it has its roots. So it grows out of what? The base, and reflects what? Reflects the ruling class's interest. So whose interest does the base actually reflect? It reflects the ruling class's interests, and this base then affects the superstructure, which is based on the base. And the base refers to what? Refers to the production forces, the materials and the resources that generate the goods society needs. As such, the superstructure justifies how the base operates and defends the power of the elite. So, we see that the base, like the thoughts of capitalism, socialism, feudalism, and the superstructure leading to the social institutions like religions, education, work environment, the media, family, etc., and how this base is actually related to the superstructure, and how the base is controlled by the people in power, and as a result the base directs the superstructure. So finally we see that it is kind of the ruling class and their interests gets emphasis when we are understanding the idea of base and how the base is influencing the superstructure. Then we are discussing Antonia Gramsci. So Gramsci is best known for his theory of cultural hegemony. So this term is important. What is it? Cultural hegemony. What do we mean by that? Which describes how the state and ruling capitalist class, who are the ruling capitalist class? The bourgeois, use cultural institutions to maintain power in capitalist societies. So how do the ruling class, as we just discussed, that the ruling class is actually controlling the base and the base is controlling the superstructure, right? So Antonio Gramsci came up with the idea of cultural hegemony, and you will come across this concept of hegemony in different theories like feminism and in post-colonialism, to understand how the people in power are kind of using their power to control people below them. So the bourgeois, in Gramsci's view, develops a hegemonic culture using ideology rather than violence, economic force, or coercion. So he is saying that the bourgeois, that is the people who are in power, they are doing what? They are actually developing this hegemonic culture using what? Using ideology, that is set of beliefs and ideas which they are fitting into the mind of people. Through what? Through the ideological state apparatuses like the schools, education system, the society, the media. Through them, they are actually kind of doing brainwash of the individuals in the society, and without any violence or economic force or coercion, they are involving and they are influencing the people's mind. So, hegemonic culture propagates its own values and norms so that they become the common sense values of all and thus maintain the status quo. So, somewhere down the line, what happens is that the things which we believe as true, things which we believe as important, things which we believe as truth are actually what? Are actually created around us by the ideological state apparatuses in order to kind of create a mind view wherein we accept things, things which are perhaps not correct. Things, for example, the gender bias, for example, the kind of equation between the haves and have-nots, they establish it as the truth. They establish it as the fact which has to be accepted as they are, because they become what? They become a part of the common sense which everybody is seeing, and it becomes a part to maintain status quo. So cultural hegemony is therefore used to maintain consent to the capitalist order rather than the use of force to maintain order. So every time you cannot kind of beat somebody or hit somebody to make them understand that thing. Instead of that, what you have to do, you have to make that person understand that even if you are being tortured and even if you are not in a very good condition, this is the ideal thing. This is how the world runs. This is how it has been for ages. And this is exactly what the ideological state apparatuses do in order to do what? In order to maintain consent to the capitalist order. So in order to maintain consent to the capitalist order, constant cultural hegemony is playing its own role. This cultural hegemony is produced and reproduced by the dominant class through the institutions that form the superstructure. So the superstructure which is created from the base is again based on these ideas and is doing what? Is actually propagating the cultural hegemony and is supporting the capitalist, the people in power, and in order to continue the same. Now we are coming to Pierre Bourdieu. So Bourdieu's work was primarily concerned with dynamics of power in society, especially the diverse and subtle ways in which power is transferred and social order is maintained within and across generations. In conscious opposition to the idealist tradition of much of Western philosophy, his work often emphasized the corporeal nature of social life and stressed the role of practice and embodiment in social dynamics. So, this is what Pierre Bourdieu did. Then there is another theorist, thinker, Paul Ricoeur, a French philosopher best known for his combining of what? Phenomenological. What does phenomenological talk about? It talks about, relating to the things which are observed or based on observable facts. So he was known for combining the phenomenological facts with hermeneutics, wherein hermeneutics talks about the branch of knowledge that deals with interpretation, especially of Bible or literary texts. So Paul Ricoeur brings about a kind of mixture, a kind of, blending of these two ideas of phenomenology and idea of hermeneutics. As such, his thought is within the same tradition as other hermeneutic philosophers or phenomenologists like Martin Heidegger, Hans-Georg Gadamer, and Gabriel Marshall. Ernest Mandel. Ernest Mandel, also known by various pseudonyms such as Ernest Germain, Pierre Gausset, Henry Whelan, Walter, was a Belgian Marxian economist, Trotskyist activist and theorist, and Holocaust survivor. He fought in the underground resistance against the Nazis during the occupation of Belgium. Now comes this important concepts of new historicism and cultural materialism. You must be hearing these terms and you get questions from here. So new historicism and cultural materialism are two literary theories that have similar characteristics but not exactly the same. The key difference between new historicism and cultural materialism is that new historicism focuses on the oppression in the society that has to be overcome in order to achieve change. So in order to achieve change, the oppression in the society that has to be overcome. Whereas cultural materialism focuses on how that change is brought about. So what is cultural materialism doing? It is actually focusing on the things which have to be done in order to bring about the change. And what is new materialism doing or new historicism doing? New historicism is focusing on the oppression in the society that has to be overcome in order to achieve change. So this is the difference between new historicism and cultural materialism. Now we come to Stephen Greenblatt. So new historicism is a literary theory that involves the parallel reading of non-literary and literary texts of the same time. Both non-literary and literary at the same time. The non-literary texts are often used to frame the literary works, but both are treated equally. It does not give priority or privilege to what? To the literary text. This theory is based on the concept that literature should be evaluated and interpreted within the context of the history of the author as well as the critic. So they are giving importance to the history of the author and the critic. This is because the critic's response to a work is also always influenced by what? Is influenced by the beliefs, prejudices, culture and environment in which that critic is. Similarly, the writer. So the author is also influenced by his surroundings. So new historicism acknowledges and is based on the concept that our understanding of literature changes with changes in time. And that's so true, because as we grow, you will see that the poem which you read when you were a school child and you are reading the same poem today, there will be a lot of change in our interpretation. At the same time, new historicism is considered to be anti-establishment and favors liberal ideas and personal freedoms. The term new historicism was coined by Stephen Greenblatt around 1980s. And J.W. Lever and Jonathan Dollimore are two practitioners of this theory. Now we come to Raymond William. So Raymond William, his work has laid foundation to the field of cultural studies and cultural materialism. The origin of cultural materialism can be traced back to the work of the left-wing literary critic, which is William, and who coined the term cultural materialism also. It can be described as a blending of the leftist culturalism and Marxist analysis. This theory came into being in the early 1980s along with New Historicism. Cultural materialism deals with specific historical documents and attempts to analyze and recreate the dominant set of ideals or beliefs of a particular moment in history. What is important and to be noted here is particular moment in history they are focusing on. Jonathan Dollimore and Alan Sinfield identifies four characteristics of cultural materialism. Now, historical context. What does it talk about? It talks about what? It talks about what was happening at the time when this work was created. So this is the first thing. Next comes what? The theoretical method. What does it talk about? Incorporation of older theories and models such as structuralism and post-structuralism. Then comes what? Textual or close textual analysis. Close textual analysis is building on theoretical analysis of canonical texts. The text, important texts which are already read are a part of the canon, are accepted as important texts that are identified as prominent cultural icons. And then is the fourth being the political commitment, wherein incorporating political theories such as feminist and Marxist theory. What is the difference between new criticism and cultural materialism? The first aspect is focus. So new historicism focuses on oppressive aspects of society, that is people has to overcome to achieve change. Cultural materialism focuses on how that change is formed. Then the next aspect is the concept of view. So new historicists claim that they are aware of the difficulties, limitations, contradictions, and problems of trying to establish the truth. Nevertheless, they believe in the truth of their work. However, the cultural materialists see new historicism as politically ineffective since it does not believe in absolute truth or knowledge. They feel that cultural materialists do not believe in the truth of what they write. Next aspect is the aspect of political situation. So new historicists situate a text within the political situation of its contemporary society, and cultural materialists situate a text with the political situation of the critic's contemporary world. So these are in brief a few differences. Stuart Hall, along with Richard Hoggart and Raymond Williams, was one of the founding figures of the school of thought that is known as the British Cultural Studies or the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies. So Hall's work actually covers the issues of hegemony, cultural studies, taking a post-Gramscian stance. He regards language use as operating within a framework of what? Of power, institutions, politics, and economics. The view presents people as producers and consumers of culture at the same time. Hegemony in Gramscian theory refers to socio-cultural production of consent and coercion. So how is consent created? By playing with people's mind. For Hall, culture was not something to simply appreciate or study, but a critical site of social action and intervention where power relations are both established and potentially unsettled. So Hall became one of the main proponents of reception theory and developed Hall's theory of encoding and decoding. So reception theory is again important, and who developed that? This approach to textual analysis focuses on the scope of negotiation and opposition on the part of the audience. So with this, we come to the end of Marxian analysis, wherein we analyzed the main concept of Marxist theory, how it originated, who were the proponents, who were the important thinkers, and what do we get out of the relation between the base and superstructure, what are the ideological state apparatuses, and how they actually kind of create our belief system, and how we are sometimes and most of the times not aware of it. Now we are moving on to the next topic, which is LGBTQ theory, which is also there in your net set English syllabus and which is again important for discussion. So, we also get the term queer. Queer theory itself emphasizes the fluidity of sexuality, or better, sexualities, and questions what? Questions the established norms, categories, and statuses. So it has this post-structuralist thinking. It has got this post-structuralist kind of approach wherein it is questioning the established norms, categories, and statuses with a special focus on challenging what? The sexual, hetero, and homo relation, gender, male and female equations. So these are the binaries which they are actually challenging. Then the class, that is the rich and poor, racial, that is white, non-white categories, and international binary orders, that is liberal, democratic, and pre-modern authoritarian. So these things are actually kind of questioned, and these things are attacked, and these things are kind of questioned through the LGBTQ or the queer theory. As a scholarly undertaking, queer theory constitutes of any form of research positioned within conceptual frameworks that highlight the instability of taken for granted meanings and resulting power equations. So this taken for granted meaning is about the gender, and how we have already kind of considered that there is a binary in it of male and female, and we are not considering any other scope of gender there. So queer theory is a field of post-structuralism that emerged in the early 1990s out of queer studies, often known like gay and lesbian studies and women's studies. The term can have various meanings depending upon its usage, but has been broadly associated with what? With the study and theorization of gender and sexual practices that exist outside of heterosexuality, that is the heterosexuality which is accepted as the norm. So the other aspects of gender and sexual practices which can exist outside this accepted norm of heterosexuality, which challenge the notion that heterosexual desire is normal. So it is questioning the fact that why only heterosexual desire is normal, why not any other form of equation or gender equation be accepted as normal. Following social constructivist developments in sociology, queer theories are often critical of what they consider essentialist views of sexuality and gender. So they question the essentialist views of sexuality and gender. Now, instead, they study those concepts as social and cultural phenomena, often through an analysis of the categories, that is, the binaries and language in which they are said to be portrayed. So, they are actually kind of attacking, the way in which the categories, binaries, and the language is framed in order to understand the concepts of the social and cultural phenomena and how they are said to be portrayed in this accepted way of representation. So informal use of the term queer theory began with Gloria Anzaldúa and other scholars of 1990s, themselves influenced by the work of French post-structuralist philosopher Michel Foucault, because we see that the post-structuralist concept of questioning things is very much evident here. So they are questioning what? They're questioning the binaries which have been accepted as a norm. They're questioning the equation of the heterosexual relationship which has been accepted as normal, and they are kind of studying these categories, binaries, and language, and seeing how they are represented in this view. Now we come to the next theory, which is the theory of eco-criticism. As the name suggests, eco-criticism actually talks about nature. So how is nature represented in novel, poem, and play? So how is nature represented in different literary genres, that is novel, poem, play, or prose, whichever it be. What role does the physical geographical setting play in the structure of the novel? So, how does the physical geographical setting play an important role in the structure of that novel? And then, how do our metaphors of the land influence the way we treat it? That is, what is the link between pedagogic or creative practice and actual political, socio-cultural, and ethical behavior towards the land and other non-human life forms? So they are actually standing up for, the political, socio-cultural, and ethical behavior towards land, number one, land, and the other forms of non-human life forms. So how are they represented? What kind of strategies have been taken up? They are discussing that. So eco-criticism is the study of literature and ecology from an interdisciplinary point. What is interdisciplinary? When two different disciplines come together, two or more disciplines come together. Herein the discipline of literature and the discipline of ecology is coming together. They are from an interdisciplinary point of view, where literature scholars analyze texts that illustrate environmental concerns and examine the various ways literature treats what? The subject of nature. So how does literature treat the subject of nature? So it was first originated by Joseph Meeker as an idea called literary ecology in his The Comedy of Survival Studies in Literary Ecology. The term eco-criticism was coined in 1978 by William Rickert in his essay Literature and Ecology, an Experiment in Eco-Criticism. It takes an interdisciplinary point of view by analyzing the works of authors, researchers, and poets in the context of environmental issues and nature. Some eco-critics brainstorm possible solutions for the correction of the contemporary environmental situation, though not all eco-critics agree on the purpose, methodology, or scope of eco-criticism. So briefly, we studied the LGBTQ queer theory, wherein we were discussing about the way the concept of gender, the binaries which are existing in the society have been questioned. And in eco-criticism, we see how it's an interdisciplinary approach where ecology and a kind of aspect of literature comes in, and we are interrogating texts based on how different motives and images and the ideas of land and non-human life forms have been dealt with. So through this, we have covered almost all the important literary theories which are there for your NetSet English, and it brings us to the final topic for discussion, which is post-colonialism, which is again a very, very important topic. So, post-colonialism, sometimes you will see is hyphenated, sometimes you will see it is without a hyphen, wherein hyphen, whenever you see in a word, it talks about something which is after a particular time. So, post-colonialism will talk about the time which comes after being a colony. But when we are saying post-colonial together, it is referring to the beliefs and points and ideas which are continuously growing and they're evolving. Right. So literature by and about people from former European colonies, mainly Africa, Asia, South America, and the Caribbean, about 1950s to present. So this is what actually the post-colonialist literature is about. What is post-colonial literature talking about? So literature by and about people from former, that is, which were earlier. What? Earlier, the colonies of Europe, earlier European colonies, mainly were in Africa, Asia, South America, and the Caribbean land. And the literature which is coming from these areas is termed as post-colonial literature. So this literature strives to broaden the traditional Western canon while also challenging Eurocentric preconceptions about literature, particularly through examinations of otherness, identity, and race. So this point you have to understand very carefully. So what does it happen? This literature, which literature? Post-colonial literature, tries to broaden the traditional Western canon. Canon is referring to the body of work which is accepted as the the norm, the main body of work, which is the center. So traditional Western canon, while also challenging what? The Eurocentric. What is Eurocentric? Eurocentric is talking about the discourse which has Europe at the center. So the discourse has Europe as its center. And this kind of discussion is termed as what? As Eurocentric. Eurocentric perceptions about what? About literature, particularly through examinations of these terms are important: otherness, identity, and race. Right? So, although post-colonial critique is comparable to culture studies, it implies a distinct perspective on literature and politics that requires its own study, because it talks about these things in specific or in specificity, that is otherness, identity, and race. Although, it is similar to culture studies, it has its own specific needs. So post-colonial critics are particularly interested in literature produced by the colonial powers, as well as writings created by individuals who were or are colonized. So the post-colonial critics, so here we were discussing what is post-colonial literature. And then we are now discussing what do the post-colonial critics do. So the post-colonial critics, they are doing what? They are actually interested in both. Number one, literature which is produced by the colonial powers, and also the writings and individual, the write-ups or the writings of the people who are colonized. So when you are talking about post-colonial critic, they are studying both. So power, economics, politics, religion, and culture are all investigated in connection to what? In connection to colonial hegemony in post-colonial theory. So again, it brings us to the idea of hegemony, which we just discussed in Marxist theory. And it talks about how, power is kind of practiced. So power, economics, politics, religion, and culture are all investigated in connection to how the colonial people actually practiced their power, and it is comes under post-colonial theory. So it addresses questions of the construction of cultural identity, particularly the concept of hybridity. So it is talking about the concept of hybridity. So it addresses questions of the construction of cultural identity, particularly the concept of hybridity, which we are going to discuss what we mean by hybridity. Now, of particular interest in post-colonial analysis is the impact of unequal power. What kind of power? Unequal power within the societies of mixed backgrounds. So the society wherein it is having people from different backgrounds, that is mixed backgrounds, then the idea of unequal power equation comes in. So of particular interest in post-colonial analysis is what? Is the impact of unequal power within the societies of mixed backgrounds. Post-colonial literary criticism involves a studied engagement with the experience of colonialism and its past and present effects. So what does it do? It involves a studied engagement with the experience of what? Of colonialism and its past and present effects. Right? Now, post-colonialism as the literary theory emerged in the late 19th century and thrived throughout the 20th century, and is a literary approach that gives a kind of psychological relief to the people, the colonized, for whom it was born. So this is when it started. How did post-colonialism emerge? When we are saying post-colonialism, we can actually understand it emerged as a reaction. It emerged after colonialism as a signification of the time or the place wherein once colonialism existed. So it refers to the discourse which deals with the effects of colonization on culture and societies. So, what does it refer to? It refers to discourse. When we are talking about discourse, we cannot miss the main idea of discourse, wherein anything and everything which any individual is speaking is not termed as discourse. It is only certain sets of things which are accepted by the people in power is what is termed as discourse. So it refers to the discourse which deals with the effects of colonization on culture and societies. So it refers to the discourse which deals with what? To the effects of colonization on the culture and societies. So our society has been influenced a lot by the colonization, and how those effects have been kind of, what are the effects, what are the changes, and the discourse or the discussion regarding that which is accepted by the people in power comes to be accepted as the post colonial discourse. It concerns with culture after the period of colonialism until the present days, or in other words, the post independence period. During and sometimes after the colonial period, the colonizers' thoughts, particularly Western thoughts, have dominated world's culture and marginalized the colonized culture. So, what happened is that after the colonial period, the colonizers' thoughts, particularly the Western thoughts, they have dominated. Dominated what? The world's culture. And what have they marginalized? They have marginalized the colonized sculpture. For example, if we are talking about one example of colonized sculpture, then it will be India, India's culture. And it has, what have they done? They have given or they have been marginalized, that is not given importance to what? To the culture of the people who have been a colony, that is the colonized people. And as a result, when the post colonial theory or post colonial writers and the post colonial literature evolved, they are writing back to the people who had colonized them. So, the concept of post colonialism is the idea of writing back to the people who have colonized them, who have been at the center of discourse so long, and who have marginalized the people who have been colonized for long. So, they are writing back and they are trying to take the center stage and occupy the center of the discourse. So the colonizer's culture is seen as the higher and superior one above the colonized culture that is seen as the other. If you remember the idea of the male as the second sex, when we were discussing Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, wherein the man is considered as the primary, the default figure, and the woman is considered as the other. Similarly, in colonization, what happens? The colonizer's culture, that is the people who are colonizing you, is seen as the higher or the superior one, and above the colonized culture. So the people who are colonized, who have become the colonies, their culture is seen as the other. So there is an othering of the ideas of these people who are the colonized. One of the important, theorists is Frantz Fanon. So he is one of the earliest writers associated with post-colonialism. He analyzed the nature of colonialism and those suggested by it. He described colonialism as a source of violence and offered a less bright and more violent prescription for moving beyond the colonial mindset. What does he argue? He argues that previously colonized people would remain hybrid with a miserably schizophrenic identity that revolt violently against their identity. So he is talking about the identity of the colonized people. Who are the colonized people? Who are the inhabitants of the colony? which has been kind of colonized by the people in power, and how their minds and their attitude, their way of being is kind of resulting in they being the having a hybrid identity. Then comes Homi Bhabha. So, The Location of Culture, published in 1994. He is an Indian post-colonial theorist. He raised a question of what happens in the cultural interaction between the colonizer and colonized. So, what happens when there is an interaction between the colonizer and the colonized? So, from the colonizer's point of view, he described that they remain their civilized and disciplined European slaves, even in the most trying circumstances. However, their presence affects the natives. So the Europeans, they are not affected by the people whom they have colonized. However, their presence affects the natives of the land. Right? So this is what is the equation between the colonizer and colonized, which was identified by Bhabha. Then Bhabha's then counter effect. So he states that colonialism, a radically unsettling, affective experience of marginality, indeterminacy, and fragmentation. And Lacan's views of the way in which identity gets constructed. So he involves analysis of nationality, ethnicity, and politics with the post-structuralist idea of identity and indeterminacy, defining post-colonial identities as what? As shifting hybrid construction. So finally, the definition which Bhabha gives in order to describe the post-colonial identities, that is the people who are existing in a colony which is not a colony anymore, which was a colony, and how the identity is not something constant, it is shifting hybrid construction. Another important thinker is Edward Said, and Edward says Orientalism, culture, and imperialism, which are very, very important and gives us important concepts of what do we mean by them. Then we have Camus, Braithwaite, The History of the Voice, and then we have Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak's In Other Worlds, Essays in Cultural Politics, and will be she. She is an Indian theorist philosopher, and she can be, her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? And her translation of La Grammatology or of Grammatology have been very important. And Spivak draws our attention to that large majority of the colonized that has left no mark upon history because it could not or was not allowed to make itself heard, and was the first post-colonial theorist with the fully feminist agenda. So it is Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak is a lady, and she is a very, very important lady in the history of post-colonialism. And she is mainly and very significantly known for this particular essay, which is Can the Subaltern Speak? And we have already referred to that when we were discussing feminism yesterday, and we are discussing it today as well because it is related to post-colonialism as well. Then Dominique Lacapra, The Bounds of Race, Perspectives on Hegemony and Resistance. Now before you have the concept of the adopt, adapt, and adapt phase. So you can just go through the points and try and understand what does these points actually mean. Yes, so according to post-colonial literary works, an author is an important part. And there are three levels of how post-colonial writing is seen in literary works, and they are termed as adopt, adapt, and adapt. If you remember yesterday when we were doing gynocriticism, we were similarly talking about the different phases in which a feminist, a female writer goes through, or the female writers have gone through history in order to develop their own autonomous self. Similarly, we are discussing these concepts here. So, in adopt phase of post-colonial literature, Peter Barry in his book Beginning Theory. So, it is one of the very basic books which I think all of you must be having. If not, you can have it and read it from a library, or if you have already bought it. Because here all the theories are given in brief, main ideas, books, publications, and also each chapter has applications of each theory. So when you go through those examples, your conception regarding each theory is it is more grounded. So he states that writer's ambition is to adopt the form as it stands, the assumption being that it has universal validity. The second phase, or the adapt phase, the phase aims to adapt the European form to African subject matter. So the form is European and it is applied to what? It is applied to African subject matter, thus assuming partial rights of intervention in the genre. The third phase of this theory is adapt phase. In this phase, a declaration of cultural independence. Then non-European writers remake the form to their own characteristics and specification without any reference from the Europeans. So all the writers put themselves in the non-European ideology. So now let us try and understand the growth which is happening in the process of one being a kind of developing the style of a post-colonial writer. So the first phase, the adopt phase, what happens? The writer's ambition is to adopt the form as it stands, that is exactly adopting or following the form as it is already there, as it stands. The assumption being that the form which is there before my eyes, I have to write exactly like that because it is having an universal validity. Then comes the phase of adapt phase, wherein what happens? You are adapting. So slowly trying to use the European form in order to adapt to the subject matter which is African. So African is an example. It can be any other of the colonies which are colonies to the European power, thus assuming what? Partial rights of intervention in the genre. However, in the final phase, that is the adapt phase, there is what? A declaration of cultural independence. So there is again a kind of independence, just the way we were discussing in gynocriticism. In the final phase, the women writers, they have their own autonomy. Similarly, here also the post-colonial writers, they are enjoying or declaring a kind of cultural independence on the kind of independence, and are not dependent on European writers and nor remake the forms to their own characteristics and specifications without any reference from the Europeans. So all these writers, what are they doing? They are putting themselves in a non-European ideology, which is referring to their being kind of free. Now, when we are discussing or studying post-colonial theory, there are few major theoretical works in post-colonial theory, which includes The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, then Orientalism by Edward Said. So, when we are talking about Orientalism, it is a Western scholarly discipline of the 18th and 19th centuries that encompass the study of the languages, literatures, religions, philosophy, the imitation or depiction of aspects in the Eastern world. So these depictions are usually done by writers, designers, and artists from the Western world. So Orientalism, in Said's words, is a style of thought based on an ontological and epistemological distinction between the Orient and the Occident. So you get detailed descriptions or description of these concepts when you give a thoughtful reading to Edward Said's Orientalism. Then, in other words, by Gayatri Spivak and Spivak's, as we just discussed, Can the Subaltern Speak? Is a very important essay. You will get this essay in the net, in internet. You just write Can the Subaltern Speak? And you will get this essay wherein Spivak is questioning how truth is constructed and how, the concept of sati and how the ideas and ideologies of the subalterns, they do not get any hearing. They if the West is trying to represent the subalterns, somewhere down the line they are not doing any justice to them. How the institutions, the kind of agency which is existing in the society is not doing justice to the people who are the subalterns and subalterns among subalterns. So these concepts are kind of discussed, and how Chakravarti, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak is talking about that. How can you state that you can represent the subalterns wherein you do not know their actual position? And when I'm using this term subaltern all the time, I would like to explain that to you. So a subaltern is someone with a low ranking in a social, political or other hierarchy. So it can also mean someone who has been marginalized or oppressed. And when we are using the term, when we are discussing subaltern in post-colonial studies, it is actually talking about the people who are colonized, the people who have been oppressed, the people who have been marginalized because they have been occupied by another power. So, for example, in India, the Indians who have been been a part of India as a colony of the Britishers, how they have been under the hierarchy, they have been under the oppression of the West. And again, when we are saying subalterns among subalterns, for example, the women who have been again subjugated and who have been kind of under the oppression of men who are already subalterns. So, when we are saying subaltern studies, the names of Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak, Dipesh Chakrabarti, Ranajit Guho, so these names come up which you need to refer to. Then The Empire Writes Back by Bill Ashcroft, Nation and the Narration by Homi K. Bhabha, Culture and Imperialism by Edward Said. Now, with the objective of locating the modes of representation where Europeans constructed natives in politically prejudiced ways, post-colonial criticism intends to unveil such literary figures, themes, and representatives that have enforced imperial ideology, colonial domination, and continuing Western hegemony. So they identify the symbols through which the Western hegemony is continued. Such approaches are exemplified in Chinua Achebe's rereading of Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Edward Said's rereading of Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, Sarah Solery's rereading of Kipling's Kim, Homi K. Bhabha's rereading of Foster's A Passage to India. So rereading is suggesting that you are actually rereading that text with the concept of decoding these aspects, the aspects of what? Literary figures, themes, representatives, which are talking about the continuation or the kind of purposeful use of the figures in order to take ahead the imperial ideology, colonial domination, and continuing of Western hegemony. So they seek to identify the gaps which are there in the text and the fissures, that is the the places where the links are missing within the discourse that provide the native with means of resistance and subversion, and the dissenting colonial with means of articulating opposition. So how they are actually kind of having gaps which can be used in order to question the thoughts which are presented in that particular text. Now we will be discussing some terms which are very, very important when we are talking about post-colonial criticism. First one being othering. So what does othering talk about? Othering involves two concepts. What are they? The exotic other and the demonic other. The exotic other presents a fascination with the inherent dignity and beauty of the primitive or undeveloped other, as delineated in its Byzantium poems, while the demonic other is represented as inferior. And inferior to what? And inferior to the negative, savage, and evil as described in novels like Heart of Darkness and A Passage to India. So now if we really want to do a post-colonial reading of any text, that the very first text which we should take up for that reading is basically, Heart of Darkness and A Passage of India. So these are very, very famous novels, and I think all of you have gone through it. And a post-colonialist reading of these are important to interrogate the symbols, the images which are used, and how the recurring themes of post-colonial ideas are there in these texts. Then comes the concept of diaspora. So diaspora refers to people who have been displaced or dispersed from their homelands and who possess and share a collective memory and myth and the nostalgic reminiscence of home, which is imaginary homelands, to use Rushdie's term. Salman Rushdie, who is also a very phenomenal writer, and his novels are also very important. So, or an inherited ideology of home becomes a personal identity as well as a collective identity of members of particular community. So, if you are reading Jhumpa Lahiri, or you are reading any other writer who is an existing example of a diasporic figure, then the concept of home, the concept of homeland, and how it is discussed, that also becomes or takes up an important part of post-colonial criticism. Then comes the concept of hybridity or syncretism. So the schizophrenic state of the migrant, or as she or he attempts to combine the culture of the origin with that of the host country without abandoning either, is called the hybridity or the syncretism. So herein, wherever we are saying hybrid, the word brings in the concept of two things together. So it's not just one, but a mixture of two things or two identities. The central theme in post-colonial diasporic literature is the negotiation of two identities, the split consciousness of being both, yet neither completely. The multiple identities or solidarities, or in extreme cases, the reassertion of native cultural identity as manifest in cultural fundamentalism. So hybridity in post-colonial studies has been influenced by the work of political theorists like Will Kimlicka, or who posts or posits a multicultural citizenship in the globalized world. Then the concept of double consciousness, which we had discussed earlier also, which is a major concept formulated by W.E.B. Du Bois, which is about double consciousness, which echoes Frantz Fanon's contention of the divided self in the black skin, white masks that the black always sees himself through the eyes of the white. So it talks about the double consciousness of the black people. Then mimicry demonstrates an ambivalent, that is a kind of a relationship which is not very stable, a kind of ambivalent relationship between the colonizer and the colonized, wherein the colonized subject mimics or imitates the colonizer by adopting the colonizer's cultural habits, language, attire, that is the dress and the values. In doing so, what he does is he mocks and parodies the colonizer. Mimicry therefore locates a crack in the certainty of the colonial dominance and uncertainty in its control of the behavior of the colonized. Homi Bhabha notes that mimicry is the process by which the colonized subject, means the person who has been colonized, he is reproduced as almost the same but not quite. So almost similar to the people who have been colonized, but not exactly the same. So it contains both mockery and a menace. It reveals the limitations in the authority of the colonial discourse, almost as though the colonial authority inevitably embodies the seeds of its own destruction. Right? So it kind of questions the authority of the colonizer and the stable identity of the colonized. And finally, the term subaltern. Subaltern is a term introduced by Antonio Gramsci to refer to the working class and used popularly by Spivak, which we are discussing since yesterday. And her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? So in this essay, Spivak raises issues about the voice of the subaltern in rebellion against the colonizer and the authenticity of the voice of the subaltern, whether she or he speaks or is spoken for. So thus Spivak ridicules the hypocrisy of the post-colonial discourses that claim, that say, or they kind of project that yes, to raise the voices of either to unheard, and they are inadvertently serve to perpetuate the marginality and subalternity of the oppressed. So in short, what Spivak is trying to say is, though the privileged post-colonial thinkers are trying to say that they are doing justice to the subalterns among subalterns, but that is not the case. Rather, they are perpetuating, or rather they are continuing their oppressed state in the real sense of the term. So Spivak's essay was a critique of the work of subaltern studies group, including who? Including Ranajit Guha, Dipesh Chakrabarti, Shahid Amin. So these names are also very important, and read these names as well for reference to post-colonial studies. Then comes hybridity, that is the quality of cultures that have characteristics of both the colonizer and the colonized. So basically, so here also we are discussing about how hybridity brings in or comes in. So it talks about the marked tension and conflicts and continually changing and evolving. Homi Bhabha, an Indian scholar, has shown how colonized people have co-opted and transformed various elements of the colonizing culture in the form of hybridity and the process by which people are mimicking or imitation. So hybridity and mimicry enable the emergence of post-colonial nationhood and individual agency. Now we have kind of discussed the important aspects of post-colonial theory, wherein we spoke about being the colonized, and how the concept of double consciousness, the idea of mimicry, the idea of hybridity, and how slowly the theory of post-colonial criticism has developed, post-colonial literature has developed, and how our Indian literature is a part, or it comes under analysis of this particular theory if we are kind of doing an analysis to it. So with this, we come to the end of this unit of literary theory post World War II. And as I call it a day, I would just, kind of request you to go through these books, the names of these books, that is Literary Theory and Introduction by Terry Eagleton, Beginning Theory and Introduction to Literary and Cultural Theory by Peter Barry, the Norton Anthology of Theory and Criticism, the Cambridge History of Literary Criticism from Formalism to Post-Structuralism by Raman Selden. So these are some important books which you can refer to as you are preparing your self for the net set examination on related to literary theory. So with this, we kind of we are going to call it a day. If you have any questions, you can write it in the chat box. If not, we will be bidding goodbye, and we will kind of bring a closure to this topic of literary theory post World War II. So I don't see any points in the chat box. So I guess that there are no questions as such. If needed, you can get in touch with me later on, as my channel description and my details are given in the description. So thank you so much for being there. Have a great day ahead. Thank you.